welcome to this episode of Life with Lizzie Lee. I am your host, Lizzie. Joining me today is Mr. Tom Wright, co-author of the New York Times bestseller Billion Dollar Whale and co-founder of Project Brazen. Tom, thank you so much for being here with me. Before we get started, can you please give our audience a quick summary of Jolo's story? How did Jolo, as the title of your book indicates, fool Wall Street, Hollywood, and the world all at once?
Well, Jolo was a young man from Malaysia who is really one of the great criminal masterminds of our time. He was able to use his connections to the Malaysian Prime Minister at the time, Najib Razak, to get close to the government structure of Malaysia. This is like, we're talking about 15 years ago now, almost 13, 14, 15 years ago. And through his connections to that family, he was able to persuade the Prime Minister to set up a big pot of money, a sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB. And Najib Razak, who was then Prime Minister, allowed Jolo to run that fund from behind the scenes. And Jolo just proceeded to steal billions of dollars out of that fund and use it to fund his own billionaire lifestyle, mansions in New York and on the West Coast of America. He used it to make the film The Wolf of Wall Street, and he became a film producer. And he started to put himself forward as a bona fide billionaire. He started to pretend that the money had come from his family, but in fact, it was all stolen. That's how he fooled Wall Street, Hollywood, and the world, because a lot of the people that he was involved with thought that his money was bona fide and that he really came from a rich family. But in fact, it was all stolen.
Mm. And speaking of the specific number of theft, you and your team recently discovered that the scale of Jolo's theft was actually much bigger than initially reported in the book. Can you please tell us a little more about the 8 billion versus 4.5 billion difference?
So since Jolo went on the run in 2015, believed to be in China, people have been trying to work out what happened, and the US government particularly. So they seized almost $2 billion worth of assets in the US, including all these mansions that I mentioned, and even the film, the receipts of the film, The Wolf of Wall Street. And in the process of winding up a bunch of companies that Jolo had set up abroad, US officials have come to the conclusion that actually the number stolen is much larger than the 4.5 billion that was traced. And that it actually is probably closer to 8 billion. And that we've seen that in recent court filings in the US, court documents and court filings in the US. And so that's a stunning number. I mean, the 1MDB fund, you should remember, the fund from which Jolo stole all the money, this was money that was raised. It was debt that the fund raised on global markets with the help of Goldman Sachs. And the fund actually raised around $13 billion. And so what the US officials are saying is that about 8 billion cannot be accounted for. 4.5 billion has been traced through, into all these kinds of assets. So that leaves, another 3.5 billion. We just don't know what's happened to it. And that's why, it's very important that Jolo face justice, and he hasn't done so far. He's been indicted in 3 countries, the US, Singapore, and Malaysia, but he's still on the run, believed to be in China, and supposedly with access to a lot of cash.
Right. So let's talk about Jolo's fugitive life. He has been on run for more than 6 years, actually, at this point. And you and your team reviewed in a recent podcast episode that he was previously spotted in China, in Shanghai, Disneyland, and hotel resort nearby. Seems like you have an update on Jolo's whereabouts in Macau, actually. Can you tell us a little more about the kind of evidence you've had and sort of the validity of the photo that you showed on social media?
Yeah, so the co-founder of my company, Project Brazen, and I, Bradley Hope, we've launched a campaign to sort of find Jolo. We're not trying to do a citizen's arrest with journalists, but we're very interested in where he is. And one reason we're doing this is because the Malaysian government is not doing that job. And the reason the Malaysian government is not doing that job is because so many people in the Malaysian government were involved with Jolo in some way or another. Right. So they're scared to have him back in Malaysia, and then that would open a can of worms. China is continuing to protect him because Jolo knows a lot about the dirt of the Belt and Road infrastructure projects. He was involved with those after he went on the run, actually after the 1MDB story. So that's the dynamic about why Jolo is given safe haven in China. So we launched this Where is Jolo campaign. It's on our YouTube channel. And we've gotten a lot of people sending in anonymous photos. Some of the photos, like the one you referenced in the Shanghai Disneyland, we know it's real because we have corroborating information from somebody who was there. So we have 2 sources on that. That photo dates to 2019, and he was able to roam freely. We have information from extremely connected Chinese source, even just last week, that Zhou Luo is continuing to be allowed to roam pretty freely in China. He's not really under house arrest. So as long as he stays within the borders of Macau, Hong Kong, mainland China, he's okay. And he has a minder that follows him. We published a photo with one of his minders. So yeah, that's his life. It's a gilded cage, I guess, but he's not exactly living in a prison.
Right. I guess it's fair to say China is harboring Zhou Luo at this point. Is there any chance that Zhou Luo will eventually face justice, say, in the United States, or is it off the table now?
So China is making the point, I mean, not officially, but through the source that we have, that the US is not returning Guo Wengui or Miles Kwok to China, and therefore, which who is a billionaire that China wants to see face justice in China. So therefore, why should we send Zhou Luo to America? But America's not really the point. He's indicted in Malaysia, where from which country he stole billions of dollars, and probably still has control of billions of dollars. So it's Malaysia that should have him back to face justice. But as I said, because the Malaysian government is now controlled by UMNO, the party that Najib headed at the time, and so many people in that government are compromised by Zhou Luo, that there's no great appetite to get him back. And so you don't see that becoming a diplomatic issue. It's never raised really from the highest levels of Malaysian government, even though, the government is still on the hook for all this money that Zhou Luo stole, and it hurts everyday Malaysians. So the short answer is no, he probably won't be sent back anytime soon, because there's too many factors that, both China wants to keep him as an asset, and Malaysia isn't that excited to see him back. But there's an election coming up in Malaysia, so we'll have to see what happens there. If the opposition get back to power, I think there would be a renewed push to get Zhou Luo back into the country.
Fascinating. And speaking of high-profile fugitives not as lucky as Zhou Luo, I wanted to chat a little bit about Fat Leonard, the Malaysian defense contractor who orchestrated the U.S. Navy's largest bribery scandal in its history. Fat Leonard was arrested in late September after escaping house arrest. Did your team ever find out what Fat Leonard leaked to the Chinese authorities about the U.S. Navy, as you reviewed in your podcast series?
Yes, again, another very high-level Chinese source revealed that China had gotten hold of sexual compromat, that is, photos and videos of Navy officers involved in lewd sexual acts that Leonard took. I mean, for the audience, Leonard was a contractor for the U.S. Navy for 3 decades, and supplying food, fuel, and security to U.S. Navy ships. And he also supplied prostitutes for Navy officers in many different ports in Asia, and would record those goings on, as he told me in our podcast, Fat Leonard. And when the US authorities, the NCIS, the naval investigators, figured out that Leonard was stealing money, padding contracts and all that kind of thing, Leonard had a mole inside the NCIS, and he knew he was being investigated. So he moved all of his company files onto Chinese servers back then. And China was able to get hold of the sexual compromat, the videos and photos that Leonard had secretly recorded when these things happened. And so when the NCIS found out about all of this, and this is back in 2013 when Leonard was arrested, they were shocked not by the padding of contracts, but by the huge national security risk that this all entailed. And it wasn't just sexual compromat; it was also ship schedules, the positioning of anti-ballistic missile defenses, all this kind of thing. And so it's a massive national security failure by the US Navy and that's one of the reasons why this hasn't been fully accounted. A lot of the admirals who were involved with Leonard weren't ever fully punished. Our podcast was really the first time that Leonard had spoken to anyone. We were able to smuggle a microphone to him in home detention. He then escaped, as you said, in September, and is on the run and went on the run and then was arrested in Venezuela. And now we're waiting to see whether he's going to be sent back from Venezuela to face his sentencing in the US.
Fascinating. You have a series of ongoing projects. For our audience who are interested, what is the best way to get to know Project Brazen's works a little better? How should they find out about your current projects?
Well, you can log on to projectbrazen.com, which is our website. You can subscribe to Fat Leonard podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And November the 1st, we have a very exciting launch in London of a new podcast, which involves a European royal family. And so it's, we have a very exciting roster of stuff coming up.
If you enjoy our discussions here, I'm sure you would find value in our new powerful marketplace tool for investors, also called China Edge. It tracks, distills, and analyzes both Chinese language and English language materials about Chinese companies, business leaders, and government entities, and reviews the often hidden links between them. For our YouTube viewers, we are offering a limited time 50% discount. Just go to the link you see on the screen and use the code EDGE50. Also, sign up for the China Edge newsletter. It's a daily 2-minute rundown of China business news you don't want to miss. The link is right here on the screen. You can also click on the link in the video's description section to get your complimentary subscription today.